Hello, my name is Dr Elisa Bayraktarov. I'm from the University of Queensland and I'm going to talk about Australia's new Threatened Species Index and in particular the Index for Threatened Birds. Australians care about the environment and do not want to see species become extinct. Recovering threatened species is also the focus of a national strategy. But how do we know how our threatened species are faring overall? The stock market has the All Ordinaries Index, which tells us how share prices for the top 500 Australian listed companies are performing overall. But what about the environment and threatened species in particular? We have over 1,800 threatened species in Australia. Until recently, while monitoring data was available for many of these individual species, there was no way to bring this all together and to learn something about the bigger picture. A Threatened Species Recovery Hub project has tackled this challenge by creating Australia's first Threatened Species Index. The index will compile all available monitoring data to tell us how our threatened species are doing overall, and also which groups are doing better or worse, and which ones are most in need of attention. A huge part of the job is finding and assembling the data. So to start with, we have compiled the data needed to create Australia's first Threatened Bird Index. Developing an index for threatened mammals and plants is already in planning. The research was led by the University of Queensland and BirdLife Australia and was supported by the Australian Government's National Environmental Science Programme, the Commonwealth Department of the Environment and Energy, all states and territory governments, and over 30 other conservation and research organizations. In addition, we have more than 130 friends of the index who are supporters, potential end users, or people who just care about threatened species and want to know more about the development of the index. I will tell you how you can become a friend of the index at the end of this presentation. But how was this index created? Okay, we have used the Living Planet Index approach. The Living Planet Index was designed by World Wildlife Fund and the Zoological Society of London. The index tracks changes in global vertebrate biodiversity through time and is used to report against international targets such as those by the Convention on Biological Diversity. It was first released in 1998 and results are published every 2 years. The last index was published in October 2018 and it showed that global vertebrate populations have declined by 60% on average between 1970 and 2014. The Living Planet Index compiles data from published scientific literature to track the population abundance of thousands of mammals, birds, fish, reptiles and amphibians around the world. However, this index does not contain many Australian threatened species. There are only 24 threatened mammals and 7 threatened birds included. This is because most data on threatened species in Australia never really gets published. It exists as raw data on people's computers, in reports of recovery teams, or in state and territory repositories. Our project is the first endeavour to bring together all of the monitoring data on threatened species in Australia. A key challenge has been finding all of the available data. We have received invaluable support from all state and territory governments and around 30 other conservation and research organizations to do this. The index itself has been developed at the University of Queensland. BirdLife Australia hosts all of the raw bird data and committed stewardship for the Threatened Bird Index component of the overall index. The Terrestrial Ecosystem Research Network, together with the Research Computing Centre, both at the University of Queensland, and also a web app developer called Planktical, have helped us to develop an automated scientific workflow to streamline data processing. The Zoological Society of London helped us to adapt the Living Planet Index method to the Australian data. So, what happens behind the scenes? An automated scientific workflow was created that processes data that is uploaded to the database. This has been essential as large volumes of data are involved. So far, the index combines data from 350,000 individual surveys on threatened and near-threatened birds. Within the process, data quality is checked to ensure that the information has been entered accurately. Then the data is grouped by yearly values and allocated to biogeographic regions. The aggregated data is now published in an open access database. And finally, the index calculation is carried out. The graphs are produced and then visualized in the web app. So this is the overall threatened bird index for Australia. The index shows the average change in populations compared to a base year. It shows a relative change and not population numbers themselves. The base year or reference year of our index is 1985, which gets an index score of 1. A score of 1.2 would mean a 20% increase on average compared to 1985, while a score of 0.8 would mean a 20% decrease on average compared to 1985. The index shows us that between 1985 and 2015, on average, there was a 52% decrease in threatened Australian bird populations. The index is based upon data for many species and subspecies, 43 in fact, and these represent about 30% of all nationally listed threatened birds. Within this, some species decrease a bit more and others a bit less. The grey cloud shows the range of trends for the individual species that make up the overall multi-species index. As some regions of Australia have poorer data available than others, we have also developed several diagnostic tools to help us understand the robustness and representativeness of the data underpinning the index. This slide shows us the current threatened species index for Australia's birds, top left, with its diagnostic tools. The map, top right, shows where threatened bird data is recorded in Australia. Light blue indicates less data or fewer sites monitored. Pink indicates more data or more sites monitored. You can see from this map that the national index is representative of most eastern states, but is marginal for Western Australia and the arid zone. The dot plot on the bottom left shows the particular years for which monitoring data was available. Each row represents a time series where a species was monitored with a consistent method at a single site. The plot on the bottom right shows the number of species in black circles and number of time series in blue diamonds used to calculate the index for each year. When using the tool, you can also view all of the aggregated data and which species are and which are not included. In a few slides, I will show you how. One of the best features of the Threatened Species Index is that we can look at results for individual bird groups, shorebirds for example, or regions like the state of Queensland, or even combinations of both such as Queensland shorebirds. On this slide, we have selected only threatened shorebirds. The index shows that numbers of threatened shorebirds have decreased by 72% on average over the last 30 years. The diagnostic tools tell us that this index is based on 6 species and subspecies. It has quite good coverage of most of Australia's coastline except for the Northern Territory. But the Threatened Species Index is not all bad news. For example, if we drill the index down to produce an index for Victoria's threatened birds, we obtain an index on 18 species and subspecies that decreased between 1985 and 2000, but then the trend stabilizes since 2000. This is where recovery actions may have kicked in and led to some success. You can go to tsx.org.au to explore and use the index. This slide shows the main index page with the diagnostic tools, and on the left you have the option to download the aggregated data underpinning the tool, and also you can have a look which species do and don't have data. The TSX is a dynamic tool to which more data can be added as it becomes available. As data for more species is added, the index will become even more powerful, meaningful, and representative. We are seeking funding to improve the web app and to secure the continuation of the TSX beyond the end of the Threatened Species Recovery Hub in 2021. Please get in touch with us for further information on the Threatened Species Index or to become a friend of the index and receive regular updates. We are always on the lookout for additional data. If you have data spanning multiple years on threatened or near-threatened Australian species, we would be delighted to hear from you. We would like to warmly acknowledge everyone who has contributed monitoring data to the Threatened Species Index. Your efforts are more than admirable, and you are the true pioneers in threatened species recovery. Thank you also to BirdLife Australia, our many other research partners, and to the National Environmental Science Programme for making this index possible.